Hey everybody, I'm Josh.
And I'm Grant.
This is Peelin Drag Podcast number 5. Basically, what we're going to do in this podcast is outline one of our favorite fish to catch on conventional gear and fly fishing. It's the carp.
Now, they're not the most well liked, or not a whole lot of people even enjoy fishing for them. They call them trash fish over here. And the opposite side of the Atlantic, everybody loves them. In Britain, Germany, Sweden, all those places, they're the ultimate sport fish. It's all anyone wants to catch. And over here, it couldn't be more the opposite.
Right.
So.
Now, it's starting to gain a lot of ground in the past couple years with the fly fishing guys. Conventional guys, not so much. There's a few syndicates that like catching them. But basically, we're going to show you a
overview.
Yeah, a quick dive into what you need to catch these on conventional gear and on fly gear.
They're really not as hard. A lot of people think, carp would be easy in some of those ponds where they're hand-fed and stuff, and there they probably are. But when you're catching them in rivers or big lakes and stuff, they're actually not that easy, but they're a lot easier once you get an overview of what you need to get them and where you need to find them.
Right. Generally, we target them in the rivers here just because we have a couple more spots that we have pinpointed a higher concentration of carp. So there's a few different styles that I like to use with conventional gear that lend themselves towards higher current areas, clear water situations, and that sort of thing. But basically what we're going to do is start off and give you a idea of the way carp think and their sort of feeding mentality, and then we'll move into the baits and the rigs and all that sort of thing. So what you want to understand with carp, the best way to wrap your mind around how to catch them and how they feed is basically just think of a cow and cattle. Carp are, and I'd say it all the time, they are the cows of,
they're just grazing is all they're doing.
Yep, they go along. I say it all the time. They're the best combination between a cow and a turkey that you're going to get in the water. They're not the smartest looking animals, and they may not seem to be the brightest, but they are very alert, and that's what keeps them alive in their environment. So when you're thinking about carp, understand that they're bottom feeders and they travel in packs. So that's how you want to approach fishing for them.
That's the thing, and very often, that's especially true for common carp. Grass carp don't seem to, especially when they get big, they seem to be lone. They just kind of roam around on their own, but the common carp are a big schooling fish. They're basically, the closest way to think about them is a giant bait shop minnow. They're basically the same species, or bait shop minnows are a subspecies of carp, so they're just going to school up together. You don't ever find one common carp. There's more wherever he was.
Right, so you have 3 different species of carp, or 3 different, 3 different species to target around here. You have your grass carp, which is, I think they're also known as Asian carp. They're going to be your longest fish.
They are big. They're the ones you see in like Sandy River Reservoir and Briary. They're the ones that when you get close to the bank, there's whoosh, they just freak out. That's a grass carp every time.
Right, and we don't really have much experience with catching those right now, but I know you can catch them on cherry tomatoes and grapes. We'll get into that one day, but not now. The other 2 species you have, or subspecies, are common carp and mirror carp. Mirrors you don't see as much, but I know they're in the James, and the commons are pretty much everywhere. That's more
what you think of when you hear the word carp. You're thinking of a common carp.
Right, more or less that's what you're fishing for. But where to find these fish in your lakes and rivers, you want to look for an area with a soft bottom. Something mud, silt, sand, stuff like that, where they can suck up and sort of filter out particles. They're looking for small invertebrates, crustaceans.
Different species of little, freshwater plankton and stuff. One of their favorite foods is crawfish and little small hellgrammites. And in the heat of the day, crawfish like to either get up under rocks or they'll bury themselves in the mud to cool off. And carp know this. That's why they're rooting around. That's also why smallmouth follow beside the carp, as eating what they churn up. But
right. So that's where you want to sort of target your efforts. Softer bottom areas, not places with really big boulders. You'll find them in pea gravel and small river stones a lot too, just because you find your hellgrammites and your crustaceans and that sort of thing in that area. So they can be targeted there, and we'll get into that in a second. So basically, I have 2 rigs I use when I'm fishing conventional. The first one is the hair rig, which is essentially a snell knot or a knotless knot where you don't clip your tag end and you have a loop in it So you can take a bait needle and actually push it through a piece of bait, grab your hair rig, pull it through, and you put a stop on there, and it'll sit on the bottom just like this. What happens is a carp comes along, sucks it up, and he goes to spit it back out because he's sort of filter feeding, and the hook will get caught.
He literally spits the hook into his own lip.
Yeah.
He's almost hooking himself completely.
And
like just
their
by
lips,
himself.
their lips are so sensitive, they feel that hook, they freak out. When they freak out, this leader goes down to a weight, almost like a Carolina rig. So he basically hooks himself with the 2 ounce weight.
As soon as they turn and take off, that weight usually does the job for you.
Right. And second rig is just, a plain, your main line to a hook. And the hooks I like to use are small, stout, very sharp, straight shank J hooks. Nothing bigger than 1/0. You want a small hook. They're very sensitive. They can feel everything. So you don't want to go too big, and you don't want to go too light with your wired hooks.
You also want to stay small just because, their mouth isn't that big.
Right.
A 30, 40-pound common carp, his mouth's probably only that big, not a whole lot bigger than a silver dollar.
Right. So you don't want to get too crazy with it. So as far as what you're using on the hair rig, I like to use a artificial bait called boilies.
These are big over in Europe. If you've ever seen any of the carp fishing videos over in Europe, this is what everybody's using, is those artificial
And boilies come in, I'm sure, thousands of different flavors and get very very complex at times, make your head spin. I just like to go simple. I bought sweet corn. They smell like sweet corn. And I like to use that when I'm in a higher current area because your bait stays in place as much. I use that because my alternative is either oatmeal, which I like to use. It works really well. You basically take a handful of it, put your hook in the middle of it, put it under the water, flex, take it out, make a little dough ball, let it sit for a minute, and it hardens up enough to where you can make a lob cast out. And as it breaks down, it puts off a little plume.
Usually, if you sit there and hold it under the water, the good trick is when you've got that hook in your hand, you're sitting there flexing and you'll see the oatmeal dust coming out. When you can, every 2-3 seconds flex and no more dust comes out, you probably got all the air packed out of it. That way you at least have a good solid core that once that thing breaks down in the water and leaves that little plume, that core is still going to be on the hook.
Right. Now, boilies can be expensive because they're not that easy to come by in the United States. There's only a couple companies that carry them. So they get expensive at times depending on what style and what brand you buy. Oatmeal is always cheap. I think it's $2 for a tub of the good stuff. This is just off-brand oats.
It's all the same.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. Just as long as they're whole oats. Don't buy like the steel cut oats or anything. Or it's got to be the whole oats so they won't stick together.
So you have your boilies and your oatmeal. I also like to use my third alternative is basically deer corn. And you soak this stuff for 24 hours. And after that 24 hours, you boil it. Yeah, you boil it for 30 minutes, and that's what's known as maize. They call it maize in the carp world. Basically, it's just deer corn. You can get a 50-pound bag of it for like $10 or less.
Yeah, I think we sell it at Bass Pro for like 8, 9, something like that. I don't know. It's under $15 for more than you'll ever use.
Yeah, it'll last you a couple years if you can keep the bugs out of it. So that's the three main baits that I use. The boilies I like to use in higher current areas just because it's more effective. The corn or the maize and the oatmeal I like to use when I have more slack water, pockets in the river where it's not so swift current, or lakes.
The good thing about this stuff is you can take a handful of it and chuck it and really really chum the carp in.
Right.
I mean you know where your bait is, so I mean you can just kind of throw it upstream from there and let it fill that area. And I mean they're gonna sit there and work their way to the bait. They're not gonna eat a little bit of it and leave. They gorge. They're just gonna eat it all.
Right. So if you know the carp are there and you're right on top of them, you can use your maize or your deer corn and sort of chum the area and put your hook bait out. You can use your oats when you know they're in the area and you don't know exactly where they are. I like to use that just because it puts off a little bit of a scent trail. If you pair either one of those with the boilies, you're going to do fairly well. Now, we haven't really discussed how to spot them. When a lot of places you're fishing for them, it's not clear water like we have here. So what we like to do, and I'll let you explain it a little bit better, is kind of surface stalking, trying to find them with the bubbles.
Yeah, they. I was down at the river today, and I mean, even the river's at 14 feet now, and even in some of these back eddies, you can see the bubbles coming up. I mean, it's not just it. It's hard sometimes when you're learning. It takes a little bit of practice to be able to tell the difference between just the mud bubbles that are coming up in this just from the bottom. It's nitrogen and CO2 and stuff coming out of the ground, as opposed to the carp bubbles. The way you tell the difference is a carp trail. Every now and then you get a pretty big bubble. They usually get that one come up, and that's those carp rooting around. I mean, they're filtering food through their gills, so they're spitting air out. And it's just, it all comes up to the surface. In clear water, they're very easy to see. That's why I like target them on the fly gear. You can almost just sight cast to them 90% of the time.
Yeah, and generally when the water's cloudy like that, you really got to watch your bubbles, because you always have your independent pockets of methane gas that comes up, and you really have to, it takes time to sort of decipher what you're looking at. If you have one that sort of never moves, obviously you're probably dealing with the methane pocket.
Usually the little, pea-sized bubbles that keep coming up, that's not a carp. If it's a carp, you're getting a baseball-sized bubble coming up every now and then. They don't mess around when they're rooting around.
Yeah, but generally you have more than one. You'll be able to actually kind of surface stalk or stalk without actually seeing them just by the bubbles. You'll have a couple here and a couple here, and that's basically just pods of carp. But it really lends yourself to be able to, if you have the ability to kind of peel back the water and know the water you're fishing, know where the structure's at, know where the bottom contours change, it's really going to help you. It's a lot like bass fishing. You have to know what you're casting at before you really attack it. And sometimes it takes a while to catch carp, so when you go out and go fishing for them, you really have to stay positive, and you really need to know the area you're fishing before you start fishing it, because once your baits are in the water, that's it.
And when you're getting your feet wet, I mean, most of the places we're fishing, you're fishing a hole, and behind us, you can sit there and cast for smallmouth all you want. So, I mean, by all means, have a reel with a bait feeder, or something like an Abu Garcia C3 with a clicker that's got a really, really soft clicker. Sit that thing on the rock and have your oatmeal and everything out and be casting for smallmouth. I wouldn't say go out there and, I mean, if you want to have your best chance, go out there with the mentality of you might only catch one, you might not catch any, but you got to get the rods in the water. But if you just want to kind of play with it at first, just take a carp rod when you go smallmouth fishing. I mean, you're in the same area.
Right.
They're always together.
And just one last little piece of gear that I've been trying to incorporate more into my conventional fishing are PVA bags. And what this is, I'm pretty sure it's a sugar-based product, but I'm not 100%. I'm not.
They're pretty cool. I'd never seen these things before you brought them out last year.
Yeah, I actually ordered these with my boilies. I haven't used them a ton, but what it is, it's basically. I might be able to get one out without going nuts here, but it's a biodegradable bag, and once water hits it,
within seconds, these things are...
Yeah, by the time it hits the bottom, within 30 seconds or so, it starts to break down. But you can see it's just a little bag, a little pouch, and you fill it with your boilies or your corn, drop your corn down in there. And they make PVA tape, which, your line is sticking out, and you have your weight and all your hook bait and everything in there. And what you do, you're supposed to bunch it up and tie it off. But of course, I didn't order any PVA tape, so what I've been doing is licking it and folding it over. And just about as soon as it hits the water, it starts dissolving. So what happens is you have a little pod of bait right there. So a carp will come along, food, and he'll start eating, and he'll get comfortable, and then your hook bait will get him right in the face, and then it's game on. So that's just another little helpful tool. That's the main thing about carp fishing, the conventional style, like the guys do over in England and stuff. It can be as complex as you want to make it, or as simple. Generally, me and him, we like to go the simple route with stuff.
Yeah, these guys are sitting out there on the edge of these ponds for hours with, 15 rods out and crap. It's just...
Right.
I don't think you need to do all that. I mean, we haven't needed to, at least.
Well, over here, carp aren't as pressured, so we don't need the vast majority of the tackle that's out there. You need a basic understanding of what you're using and how to use it, and generally you'll be, pretty successful with it. But the conventional stuff is kind of in the dark. Not a whole lot of guys are doing it. The fly fishing stuff is really where it's at, and I'll let Grant go crazy with it because I know he loves fly fishing for him. So
yeah, they're definitely probably my favorite freshwater fish to target. I mean, I love catching smallmouth. They're the one I probably know the most about. But every time I'm smallmouth fishing, I have half a box full of nothing but carp flies, and it's just because they do become picky. I don't think they care much about the fly. It's just you have to present it to them. Presentation is key. Just because they're such a big scent feeder, we don't have scent. You gotta match what they're eating, or at least throw them something that they want, they think is food. There's two ways I'm usually targeting them. One way, I'll be sitting there smallmouth fishing, and sometimes they tail just like a redfish. I mean, you'll see them in the mud flats on the banks, and their tail just be sitting there waving at you almost, and you just about 4 feet in front of his tail. If you can lay out a soft cast, let it roll out onto the water. Never use lead eyes in your flies. I always use bead chain just because it hits the water a lot softer. Just bloop, let it get there. And a lot of times you can't see them when they're that far away. You just kind of see their tail. You have an idea where they are. When they start moving forward to where that fly is, just a slight little twitch. I'm talking, less than an inch. Sometimes just a wrist flick, but not hard. Just move it just enough to make that fly dance a little bit, and he'll come over there and pick it up. You talk about the softest hit. I mean, you can't feel anything. It's more or less you just kind of see your line tick, and you don't ever feel it or anything. But you kind of blind hook set into them, and you hang on when you set the hook because they lose their mind. I don't really like targeting the massive ones on the fly rod. They kind of just lug their weight around. I like targeting little 5 to 10 pounders. They explode when you set the hook. I've broken more gear on carp than I have on any other species of fish. So when you're targeting fish that are tailing or cruising fish, I like to throw something that imitates a crayfish or even like a little hellgrammite or just something small laying rooting around the bottom like a leech or something that they think is food. My favorite flies for that, a little bit larger flies than I throw the other way I like to fish for carp, but the most common fly I probably throw is a backstabber. It's just a little marabou soft tackle fly. That's another thing, is a soft tackle. I dress the front of almost every carp fly I have with a soft tackle. They just have a lot of good looking action, real lifelike. Nothing really to them. It's just some marabou and a little bit of dubbing on the back, and they're gonna lay that way in the water. You just scoot them around. I throw them in 3 different colors. That's olive and gray. The first one was that golden brown or rusty brown and gray. Then this is the black and gray, and the black and gray's got a few rubber legs hanging off the back. They like rubber legs, just not a whole lot. The other thing is flash. I know guys love to throw flash at flies. More than 1 or 2 strands of crystal flash, you're going to turn them off. They don't like that crap. I mean, just if you put too much flash in a fly, they're going to eat it. I don't know if it spooks them or what. I mean, I have carp woolly buggers and I have smallmouth woolly buggers. When I throw a woolly bugger at a carp, it's bare. There's no flash in it anywhere. If it's got a bead head, I dip the bead in fingernail polish, like black polish, just to dull it. Don't want any flash on those things. My next fly is the crayfish pattern I throw a lot. I think it's called a carp crawl. I tied this one myself, but
that thing's wicked.
It's a bad little carp fly. There's not a whole lot to it. Just a packed deer hair tail, some small, that's extra small lead eyes right there. So you could use lead if they're really tiny. And this is Indian hen soft tackles for the claws. There's 2 of them, and then just 2 pheasant tail fibers for the antenna. They usually won't let that thing sit. If I throw that thing, I mean, this is the only fly I've ever been able to catch a carp on a sloppy cast. If I throw that thing and it slaps the water, I mean, I'm sure I've spooked him. 2 seconds later, my line's screaming. I mean, he just came over there and absolutely T-boned it. So that's been one of my most productive flies for the tailing or the mudding fish, the fish that you can blatantly see feeding. The other way I like to catch them, a lot of times this is the more common way, you see them just sitting in the riffles, or they'll sit in the tail outs of the pools, just sitting still. I actually nymph for them just like you would with trout. I like to throw, my there's probably only about 3 patterns I throw heavily. One of them is a Chuck Craft pattern, local guy. It's called CK Nymph. Just it's similar to a woolly worm, just a little bit different. A little bit larger bead, a little bit longer hook. Tie 'em in about a size 10. That's the other thing. I didn't talk about hook size for these. All of these are tied on the same hook. This is I think it's a number 6 octopus straight shank. That's a real stout little hook, but it's real easy to conceal, and they won't. It's not too big for them to pick up. But these are tied on a number 10, 3x long. The next color I like to tie, these are tied with ice dub, and that's olive brown. And then this one's tied with hare's ear ice dub. That's just the black, the natural black, I believe. And the same way you would nymph with trout. I don't use an indicator though. I use a small little pinch float. I mean, it's the little fold over foam indicator, so I do, but it gets pulled under. It's just something I can watch in the water. When it ticks, you just set the hook. The other flies, these are actually legit trout nymphs. This one's called a soft hackle spruce. This is a small nymph. I mean, this is a 12. No, it's a 14. And I've actually caught quite a few carp on this one. This one's pretty tore up, but still working. Just a red chenille body. This is a peacock hurtle tail and a soft hackle for the head. And then the other also in a 14 is a hare's ear. Carp love hare's ears. And this one's a little bit more streamlined than I like, but just pick that dubbing out underneath the wing case, and for some reason, I mean, every fish likes a hare's ear. And that's just the nymphing carp. I mean, a lot of times you'll see one plain as day, 10 feet from you, about 3 feet below the surface, just sitting there. And he's usually not feeding, but if you pass something right by his head, you'll kind of see him move to the side. He'll pick it up. I mean, they will eat. You just got to throw them something that looks halfway decent.
Now, what weight fly gear do you use?
The weight rods I use, a 6 or an 8 usually gets it done. I do just stick with a smallmouth line because 90% of the time I'm smallmouth fishing when I catch most of my carp. 6 weight with a bass taper line or an 8 weight with a bass taper line. Either way, if you know, like when I go to the Rappahannock, I take an 8 weight because the smallest carp I've ever hooked up there's 15 pounds. They're big. They're stronger. That water's a little bit colder, but down here a 6 you can usually get away with it. The main thing is the reel. Make sure you got a large arbor reel, a lot of backing, and a smooth drag. They will bulldog you. They really will. I mean, it's not a slow run like a flathead or, a bass or something. I mean, they lose it. You set the hook, and it's just, they have a rooster tail coming off their head flying through those shallows. They're nuts. That's why they're fun, man. I mean, they will dump 60 yards of backing and not even think twice about it. I've had one. It's the only species of fish in freshwater where I've ever seen spool on a fly reel. And it was like a 7-pounder. It was a tiny little carp, but I just couldn't stop it. Bought a 6 weight.
Don't they call them like the equivalent of bonefish?
Yeah, they're like the Virginia bonefish or the golden bonefish, freshwater bonefish, whatever you want to call them. You fish for them on flats. You throw small flies, almost little crustacean flies, and when you set the hook, man, they're gone. They do not turn around either, and it's so hard. It's like combining a bonefish and a redfish. Right. You get that last 10 foot of line, you can't turn them. You can't get. They got such wide shoulders on them. You just can't get them to look at you.
And that's another good point. When you're fishing for these things, they have very rubbery mouth. There's no bones in their mouth, so make sure you have a reel with a good drag on it. And make sure your drag is adequate for the fish you're targeting. Don't want it too tight because the hook will rip out. You don't want it too loose.
You'll definitely pull a hook out on them. If they start head shaking, which they do, they'll rip a big old hole in their mouth, and you just got to be careful with them. That's why I like using a 6 or an 8, fairly medium action, because I want that rod to absorb most of that head shake. Right,
and like your conventional stuff, a longer rod helps. You want something that's stiff, but you don't want it too stiff because you don't want to pull that hook out. So I know a lot of guys use 9-foot rods.
A lot of those like Daiwa carp rods and stuff are like 7 or like 8.5 feet long.
So that's just another point to close out with. Just make sure you have adequate gear. Obviously, guys can only use what they can get their hands on, but if you do want to get into this more, make sure you're using a stiff reel, but not anything too heavy. You want to kind of have a fast tip on it. That way you can keep that hook buried in there.
Something with a smooth drag.
Yeah, without ripping out the hook. But like you said, We use like what 4,000 size reels.
Yeah, around in there, 4,000, 5. No, not a 5. At
Yeah.
least a 3 or 4,000.
3 or 4,000. That's just to not get schooled. 2,500, the drag will handle it and everything, but sometimes some of the areas that we fish, they have a lot of running room, so you don't want them to get too far out.
We like to try and slow them down before they get to all those rocks and cut us off. So
yeah, generally. Just one last thing I don't think I mentioned. Your hair rigs are usually always made out of, or you usually always tie them up out of braid. I understand in some of the clear waters, like you fish around here, if you're fly fishing for them in clear waters, obviously you can spin fish for them in clear water. So you're going to want to try to incorporate fluorocarbon somehow. Fluorocarbon does a lot better when you're using it just with your single hook and your oatmeal. About the only way you can tie up your hair rig is with braid, but that's pretty much it.
That's one thing I didn't mention. Use with tippet. Don't go much heavier than 10-pound fluoro because they will see it. They do have a really good eyesight. In that clear water, in the low water summer conditions, that water around the James, the Rap, I've seen them in the back of some creeks in the Potomac. I mean, it's really clear. I wouldn't throw anything less than 6, but I wouldn't go. I mean, I could see people using 12-pound fluoro, but that would be the absolute max. I wouldn't go any higher than that.
And they're considered a trash fish, but that gets thrown around loosely nowadays. These things are bulldogs. They'll fight you to the end. Generally, everybody's going out to catch and release anyway. So they shouldn't even have the trash fish tag on. If you had fish for them,
a lot of people
you're
say the carp, they only live in these nasty lakes. The carp ruined our lakes, and the only thing that can live there is carp. We're responsible for ruining the lakes. I mean, we ruined them to the point where nothing can live there but carp. Carp are really adaptive animals. They're hard to kill. But that doesn't mean they're tearing up lakes. I mean, if you look in Europe, they don't live in nasty water. I mean, people eat carp in Europe because they're in the cleanest, most beautiful streams, most beautiful lakes you can find. That's the thing. They're not really in disgusting water over there, except in like
I'm gonna correct you on that.
Or something.
Dudes will murder you if you eat a carp in Europe. These things are precious because they only have a few. It's
more culture over there than it is.
Over here,
food over here.
Yeah, over here we have so many different species, a wide variety. Carp, just like gar. Carp and gar really don't get focused on as much. But that's why we did this podcast, sort of bring it into your world and sort of open your eyes to carp fishing because it is a whole lot of fun. It's the hardest fight you'll get in freshwater, arguably.
Pound per pound, definitely is.
Yeah, but definitely make sure you go with gear that'll hold up to it.
If you like a challenge, they're a real fun fish to chase.
Right. Now, under our tips and techniques and rigging page on the Peel and Drag website, he's going to have some carp flies tied up. I'm going to have a video on how to tie up a hair rig, just so if you guys are interested in this, you have just something to go off.
We're going to give you the information you need to get the job done.
Yeah, we're getting ready to chase our carp citation. Neither one of us have one yet. We're getting ready to go this weekend. We have a very good feeling. We found some big fish in the 30-pound range and maybe some larger. So hopefully we'll come out of this weekend and present this video to you with a big fish to go along with it.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have some pictures to put on here.
Yeah, so there's going to be a carp push on our website with this podcast, and if you want a little bit more information, I typed up a kind of beginner's how-to carp thing if you like to read and have some information, just a hard document. Like I said, he'll tie up. I'm sure
that'll be on the fly tying.
Yeah, his fly tying section will have a few of these flies tied up, and I'll do the hair rig how-to and how to prepare your deer corn to transform deer corn into maize and something you can use while you're on the water. But
that's about it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it for us. We once again appreciate you guys watching and tuning in. This one ran over a few more minutes than what we like. We usually like to keep it at 20. But like I said, we appreciate all the support you guys are giving us. If you like what we're doing, you can follow us on Facebook at Peel and Drag Extreme Fishing. We're on Instagram, Twitter. You can email us if you have any more questions, or you want to get in touch with us. There's a link to our email on the website too.
We're both on TKAA. If any of y'all are in the Tidewater Kayak Angling Association, he's, what's your name?
Wolf
the Wolf
Man.
Man. And I'm a Fly Fanatic.
Yeah. But anyway, like I said, there's the tabs to our Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff on the website. The website is www.fishhardorstayhome.com. Pretty much think that's all the information we can give you guys. So once again, I'm Josh.
I'm Grant.
We appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.
We'll see you out there.
All right.